The nation of Israel just completed a deadly assault on the Palestinian city of Jenin. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from Common Dreams. Their headline here: catastrophic Israeli forces unleash humanitarian disaster in Jenin. Let me read you a little bit of this. They say thousands of people who live in that city in the occupied West Bank are reportedly fleeing the poverty-stricken refugee camp as Israeli military forces Tuesday continued to batter the city's water, power, and healthcare infrastructure. Mohammed Abu Talal, a resident of the camp, told Middle East Eye on Tuesday, a day after a large-scale assault by the IDF left at least 10 Palestinians dead and scores more wounded, that the refugee camp's, quote, streets are all dug up and uprooted by bulldozers used by the Israeli forces. We're lucky to be joined by a great guest this morning who can help break down the situation and what we know at this point. Omar Shakir serves as the Israel and Palestine director at Human Rights Watch. He investigates their human rights abuses in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Welcome, Omar. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So just tell us what we know so far.
Sure. So what we know is in this two-day military incursion into the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces killed 12 Palestinians. Scores more were injured, including children. Children are among those killed. We know that more than 3,500 Palestinians were displaced from their homes in the refugee camp. We know that thousands more had their access to electricity and water cut. And we know that for long stretches, ambulances were blocked from entering the refugee camp to provide health services. Hospitals were struck by tear gas canisters. And this isn't some one-off event. Jenin has been, for much of the last year and a half, frequently targeted by the Israeli army. In fact, we're seeing unprecedented numbers of Palestinians gunned down in the West Bank. And this is in year 57 of an occupation that's been going on for far too long.
So I want to ask about the counterpoint here. This is from Lisa Daftari, which is obviously she's a very vigorous defender of Israel. Her publication reported that Israel revealed details about an underground terrorist route that was uncovered in a mosque. Lisa said the mainstream media only chimes in now to tell you about the so-called war crimes Israel has committed by going into Jenin. They leave out these small details. So the argument is that this is on the heels of a sort of broader assault on Israel and its retaliation, et cetera, et cetera. What is your response to that line of argumentation? I'm sure you disagree with it, but what are people who claim there's validity to that getting wrong?
Sure. I think part of it is we see this argument being used all the time in Gaza, for example, and it's been 17 years of continuous rounds of assaults and escalations, right? The reality here is this is part of a methodical policy. Human rights organizations, including Israeli human rights organizations, Palestinian, international, have said that the Israeli government is committing the crime of apartheid against Palestinians. There is no security justification for Israel expropriating Palestinian land to build settlements. There is no security justification for giving building permits to build settlements, which are illegal, and denying them for Palestinians to add extensions to their home. There is no security justification for policies that deny residency rights for Palestinians to live with their Israeli partner in Israel, but allow it to foreigners of any other nationality. Security is frequently invoked. It's often pretextual. And even when security is part of the consideration, and of course there have been Israelis who have been killed, the Israeli government goes so far beyond what international law authorizes, right? Actions that affect thousands of people, that displace them, that they no more justify these actions, than torture invoked in the name of security would justify those particular actions.
Talk to us a little bit about this current Netanyahu government, which has been described, I think justifiably so, as the most far-right, especially some of the coalition partners that are part of this government, the most far-right government in Israeli history. Do you see this action as, in character, different from some of the assaults that have gone on under previous administrations?
So you're right to highlight the continuity of these policies. I mean, the difference is one of scale, not kind, right? So I think this government has been very explicit. The founding text that created the coalition sets out that their primary objective is ensuring the exclusive, and that's in quotes, right of the Jewish people to the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. The problem is half that population who lives there are not Jewish, they're Palestinian. And the government has been very explicit about expanding settlements, about demolishing Palestinian homes, about relaxing the use of force standards that make it more easy to kill Palestinians. They're not hiding it. They're saying that the current reality is is the final solution. There is no sort of peace process. There is no plan. There's just a transparent policy to ensure the well-being of the Jewish people at the expense of Palestinians. And more people are calling this out as apartheid. And that's sort of where the conversation is shifting. I think in the U.S., that conversation is not caught up with where it is in the rest of the world, but it's the transparent consensus within the human rights movement and by more and more voices from the former UN Secretary General to leading former Israeli government officials to governments like South Africa and Indonesia, governments across the world.
So what's the immediate future look like for Jenin on the heels of all of this? In the coming days, the coming weeks, the coming months, what can observers expect to see out of the region?
I'm afraid I don't have much optimistic to share with you because this situation is in some ways unprecedentedly bad. And the problem we have here is that when these cycles of violence take place, when war crimes and other abuses take place, and by the way, not just by the Israeli government, sometimes these abuses are committed by Palestinian actors, there is systematically no accountability. So that fuels a cycle of impunity. So we see the same kinds of things happening again and again. People forget that the Jenin refugee camp 20 years ago was the site of an Israeli incursion that left scores of Palestinians killed. So until you actually address the lack of accountability and you deal with the root causes to this systemic violence, which include at its core Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, I'm afraid you're going to continue to see cycles of these violence take place. More raids, more killings, more limited collective punishment that amounts to less access to electricity, water, etc. The solution is to recognize the reality of systematic rights abuse and complicity in it and ensure accountability for those serious abuses.
And Omar, finally, we tracked closely here huge protests across Israel, bringing together a lot of different groups in reaction to what was widely seen, and I think justifiably so, as a sort of judicial takeover attempt from Netanyahu and his government. Do you see any signs of similar pushback against these types of deadly assaults? Is there widespread public support for these type of actions from the Israeli people?
So look, there's a minority, but there is a contingent of Israelis that show up every week at these protests with signs that make the linkage between the judicial overhaul and the repression, apartheid, occupation of Palestinians. There's still a minority. The majority protest movement has largely focused on the issue of the judiciary, but more and more people are drawing the connections that understand that what's happening in Israel is the inevitable result of decades of illegality in the West Bank, of impunity, and many of these forces that have risen to power that are pushing the judicial overhaul actually, come from the settler movement, actually want to import, these values there. So some linkages are being drawn. It's not enough. And I think it's quite important that we continue to make the connection, between these issues, because ultimately, yes, the judiciary has been a rubber stamp on many of the abusive policies of the occupation, but at the same time, obviously removing even that limited check, could make the situation dramatically worse. And always Palestinians receive, the brunt end of those kinds of changes.
Omar, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break down this complicated and very tense situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.